Zentharis was the crown jewel of the known galaxy, a civilization so advanced that it no longer needed to fight for survival. At least, that was what its people believed. The sprawling cities were marvels of engineering, towering structures of shifting crystal and energy fields that hummed with power. Their ships, sleek and silent, moved like shadows across the stars. But Zentharis was not unassailable. The Syndrex Coalition, a brutal empire of expansionist species, had forced the once peaceful Zentharians to confront a harsh reality. Even the brightest stars could be extinguished. "They're breaching our borders faster than anticipated," High Chancellor Tyrix announced in the council chamber. His voice echoed across the polished hall, where holographic maps displayed glowing red incursions across Zentharian territory. Tyrix's silver-hued face betrayed no emotion, but his coiled posture spoke volumes. "We need more than weapons. We need a deterrent, a force so powerful that the Syndrex will think twice before stepping into our system again." The murmurs from the council grew louder until a voice cut through the noise. "We have already begun," said Dr. Valrex, stepping forward. His yellow eyes gleamed, reflecting the map's holographic glow. "Project Aegis Prime is nearing completion." The room fell silent. Everyone knew about Aegis Prime, the Zentharians' desperate gamble. "What assurance do we have that your creation will succeed?" asked General Carrion, a warrior as imposing as the armor he wore, black and gleaming. Valrex smirked. "When Aegis Prime chooses its wielder, it will make even the Syndrex tremble." Deep within Zentharis' subterranean laboratories, Aegis Prime rested on an elevated pedestal. It was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Liquid metal, shifting and shimmering as if alive. Its surface rippled with colors that defied explanation, and its core pulsed with a steady, deliberate rhythm. The scientists who had designed it spoke in reverent tones. Aegis Prime was no mere weapon. It was an autonomous system, designed to bond with a single being. Whoever wore it would gain unimaginable power, strength, invulnerability, and the ability to reshape energy itself. But there was one catch. "The armor chooses its host," Valrex explained to the council. "It evaluates candidates based on criteria we have yet to fully understand. Only the most worthy will be accepted." "And if no one is chosen?" Tyrix asked. Valrex hesitated. "Then we've failed." The search for Aegis Prime's host became a planet-wide spectacle. Zentharis' strongest warriors, brightest scholars, and most cunning strategists were summoned to the laboratories to present themselves. Each approached the armor with a mixture of awe and trepidation. General Carrion was the first to try. He stepped forward confidently, his obsidian armor glinting under the laboratory's lights. As his hand neared Aegis Prime, the armor emitted a low hum that resonated through the room. For a moment, it seemed to acknowledge him, but then it recoiled, retreating into itself like a wounded animal. Carrion's jaw tightened, and he withdrew his hand. "It is defective," he growled. "It is not defective," Valrex countered. "It is discerning." One by one, other candidates stepped forward. Warriors, scientists, politicians, and one by one, the armor rejected them all. By the end of the trials, whispers of failure had begun to spread. While Zentharis grappled with its problem, Earth was having a far less dramatic time. Humanity had only recently joined the galactic community, and though their technology lagged behind, their knack for diplomacy had earned them a seat at the table. James Carter, a mid-level diplomat, was part of a trade delegation visiting Zentharis. In his early 30s, with perpetual stubble and a slightly wrinkled suit, James was the sort of man who went unnoticed at meetings. "Just smile and nod," his boss had advised him before the trip. "Let the bigwigs do the talking." James was fine with that, but on the second day of their visit, curiosity got the better of him. While the rest of the delegation toured Zentharis' crystalline archives, James wandered off, drawn by the faint hum of machinery. He found himself in a cavernous laboratory, where a shimmering mass of liquid light rested on a pedestal. "That's cool," James said aloud, stepping closer. "Stay behind the barrier," barked a Zentharian guard, their angular features sharp with irritation. James held up his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, just looking." But before anyone could stop him, he reached out, and the moment his fingers touched the armor, the room exploded with light. The laboratory was silent, except for the hum of Aegis Prime as it encased James Carter in its brilliant light. Guards and scientists stared, their expressions a mix of awe and disbelief. James staggered back, his arms covered in a shimmering metallic layer that moved like liquid but felt solid as stone. The armor fit him perfectly, adapting to his every movement. "What the?" James stammered, looking at his hands. The armor responded to his confusion, shimmering and tightening as if to reassure him. "It's active," Valrex shouted, breaking the silence. "Aegis Prime has chosen." Guards raised their weapons. "Remove it." "I didn't do anything," James protested, raising his hands defensively. As he did, the armor generated a translucent energy field, deflecting the guards' weapons as if they were toys. "Stand down," Valrex barked, stepping forward. "Do you realize what this means? The armor recognizes him as its host. It cannot be removed." James blinked. "What do you mean, cannot?" Valrex ignored him, his yellow eyes gleaming with excitement. "Fascinating. Truly fascinating." James groaned. "Yeah, great. I'm a science experiment now." News of Aegis Prime's activation spread like wildfire. Within hours, the High Council convened to address the unprecedented event. Chancellor Tyrix stood at the head of the chamber, his silver skin reflecting the light of the holographic projections around him. The room buzzed with tension as images of James, encased in the armor, flickered above the council table. "This human," General Carrion sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "He is not worthy of Aegis Prime." "The armor has made its choice," Tyrix said calmly. "We must honor it." "This is an insult to Zentharian honor," Carrion thundered. "The armor was created to protect us, not to bond with an outsider." "Perhaps this is a sign," countered a council member from the science division. "Aegis Prime was designed to choose the most suitable host. If it selected a human, then perhaps there is something we have overlooked." The debate raged for hours, with no clear resolution. Meanwhile, James sat in a secure chamber, flanked by guards and feeling like a trapped animal. As night fell, James finally had a moment of quiet. He stared at his reflection in the chamber's polished walls, the armor glinting faintly in the dim light. "All right," he muttered. "Why me?" "You are chosen," a voice echoed in his mind. James jumped, looking around. "Who said that?" "I am Aegis Prime." The voice was calm, deliberate, and distinctly non-human. James swallowed hard. "Okay, great. I'm talking to armor now. That's normal." "You possess traits necessary for survival," the voice continued. "Adaptability, resilience, empathy." "Empathy?" James scoffed. "What does that have to do with anything?" The armor didn't respond, but James felt a faint pulse of reassurance, a sensation that told him he wasn't alone. The next morning, James was dragged back to the laboratory, where Valrex and his team were eager to test the armor's capabilities. "Hold still," Valrex instructed, adjusting a device that projected holographic targets across the room. Before James could protest, the targets began firing energy bolts at him. The armor reacted instantly, generating shimmering shields that deflected each shot with pinpoint accuracy. "Remarkable," Valrex muttered, scribbling notes on his tablet. James, less enthused, shouted, "A little warning next time." Over the next several hours, James discovered more of the armor's abilities. It enhanced his strength, allowing him to lift objects several times his weight. It boosted his reflexes, enabling him to dodge attacks he couldn't even see. And it responded to his thoughts, adapting to his needs in real time. By the end of the session, James was exhausted, but Valrex was ecstatic. "The possibilities are endless," the scientist said, his eyes gleaming. "You are a walking miracle, Carter." "Yeah, well, I feel like a walking migraine," James muttered. While James struggled to adapt to his new reality, tensions within Zentharis continued to rise. Factions loyal to General Carrion began spreading propaganda, painting James as an unworthy thief who had stolen Zentharis' greatest creation. Posters with slogans like "Zentharis for Zentharians" appeared across the capital, and whispers of rebellion grew louder. In a private meeting with Tyrix, Valrex voiced his concerns. If this unrest continues, it could tear Zentharis apart. Tyrix nodded grimly. We must ensure the people see Carter as an ally, not an enemy. He must prove himself. How exactly? Valrex asked. By defending us, Tyrix said simply. Tyrix didn't have to wait long. Syndrex spies, emboldened by Zentharis' internal strife, launched a coordinated attack on the capital's energy nexus. Their goal was clear: capture Aegis Prime and cripple Zentharis' defenses. James was thrust into action. Are you sure about this? He asked, standing in the nexus labyrinthine corridors as alarms blared around him. Do you have a choice? Valrex replied. With the armor guiding him, James navigated the maze-like structure, neutralizing Syndrex operatives with a combination of brute strength and precision strikes. The armor generated energy pulses that incapacitated enemies without killing them, a feature James appreciated more than he expected. By the time he reached the Nexus core, the Syndrex forces were in full retreat. That wasn't so bad, James said, catching his breath. Valrex smirked. You're not done yet. The Syndrex were not a species known for their subtlety. Days after their failed attempt to seize the energy nexus, their fleet loomed at the edge of Zentharian space, a massive wall of starships bristling with weapons. The Zentharian High Council convened an emergency session in the capital's crystalline spire. Holographic projections filled the air, showing the Syndrex fleet inching closer with every passing hour. This is an act of war, General Carrion declared, his booming voice filling the chamber. They demand Aegis Prime, Tyrix said, his tone measured. They see it as a threat to the balance of power. And what do you propose? Carrion sneered. Hand it over? Perhaps we should gift-wrap the human while we're at it. James, seated awkwardly at the far end of the table, raised a hand. I'm right here, you know. The council erupted into arguments, but it was clear they were running out of options. Zentharis' defenses were formidable, but the Syndrex fleet was overwhelming. It's time to negotiate, Tyrix said finally. The Syndrex envoy arrived under a banner of truce, but their intentions were anything but peaceful. Envoy Carax, a towering reptilian figure with scales that shimmered like molten gold, stepped forward, flanked by heavily armed guards. We demand the surrender of Aegis Prime, Carax hissed. His voice carried the weight of an empire. Relinquish the armor, or Zentharis will burn. Not happening, James said, crossing his arms. The council shot him a collective glare, but Tyrix quickly intervened. Surely there is another way to resolve this conflict. Zentharis does not seek war. Carax's reptilian eyes narrowed. Then you have already lost. As the envoy departed, James turned to Tyrix. That went well. They won't wait long, Tyrix said grimly. If we don't act, they'll attack. The Zentharian military scrambled to prepare for the inevitable assault. Fleet commanders issued orders, defensive grids were activated, and evacuation protocols were put in place for the capital's civilians. Meanwhile, James found himself back in the lab, undergoing yet another round of grueling tests. Valrex was determined to push the armor, and its host, to their limits. You need to learn control, Valrex said, adjusting a training drone. Right now, Aegis Prime is carrying you. That will not be enough. As the drone attacked, James focused on channeling the armor's energy. He discovered new abilities with every session. Energy pulses that could disable electronics, gravitational distortions that immobilized enemies, and shields that could withstand concentrated firepower. Despite the progress, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head. Why do I feel like a guy with a wrench being asked to fix a spaceship? Because you are, Valrex replied without a hint of irony. The Syndrex fleet struck with surgical precision, overwhelming Zentharis' outer defenses and cutting off supply lines. The capital, once a beacon of tranquility, became a war zone. James took to the battlefield, his armor glowing with power. Aegis Prime guided his movements, deflecting enemy fire and neutralizing Syndrex troops with devastating efficiency. During the battle, James faced Syndrex commander Zentharis, a hulking figure clad in advanced exoskeletal armor. The two clashed in a fierce duel, their blows shaking the ground beneath them. "You are an anomaly," Zentharis growled, his voice distorted by his helmet. "But anomalies can be erased." "Yeah, good luck with that," James shot back, using a kinetic pulse to knock Zentharis off balance. The battle ended with the Syndrex retreating, their flagship disabled by James's final attack, a gravitational surge that rendered their weapons useless. The victory came at a cost. Zentharis was left in ruins, its once pristine streets now littered with debris. The Syndrex threat had been temporarily neutralized, but the damage was done. As the council convened to assess the aftermath, Tyrix turned to James. "You've saved us twice now, but we cannot rely on you alone. The galaxy will not let us keep Aegis Prime without consequence." James sighed. "You think I don't know that? The armor may have chosen me, but I didn't ask for this." "Yet here you are," Tyrix said. "You have a responsibility now, not just to Zentharis, but to the galaxy." James didn't have an answer. He left the council chamber, the weight of the armor heavier than ever. Determined to understand the armor's purpose, James and Valrex began investigating Aegis Prime's origins. Their search led them to Luminara, an ancient Zentharian research station orbiting a distant star. The station, long abandoned, was a labyrinth of forgotten technology and holographic records. Among the files, they found a recording from the original creators of Aegis Prime. "We have created a guardian," the recording stated, the speaker's voice distorted by age. "But it will not bond with us. We lack the traits it requires. It will seek a host capable of uniting the galaxy, one who embodies adaptability, resilience, and compassion." Valrex stared at the recording, his expression unreadable. They knew we weren't the ones. James frowned. "So, what does that make me? A backup plan?" "No," Valrex said. "It makes you the answer." As James grappled with the revelation, the Syndrex Coalition began forging alliances with other galactic factions. Their goal was clear: to unite against Zentharis and claim Aegis Prime for themselves. Back on Zentharis, tensions within the council reached a breaking point. General Carrion, now in exile, rallied his supporters, painting James as a threat to Zentharian sovereignty. The planet teetered on the brink of civil war, even as the galaxy prepared for another invasion. Realizing that Zentharis could not stand alone, James called for a summit of galactic leaders. Held aboard the neutral station of Solara Nexus, the summit was a last-ditch effort to prevent all-out war. James, flanked by Valrex and Tyrix, addressed the assembled leaders. "I didn't ask for this," he began, "but here we are. Aegis Prime isn't a weapon, it's a test of whether we can rise above our differences and build something better." The room erupted into arguments, but James stood firm. Using both the armor's gravitas and his own diplomatic skills, he slowly began to sway the delegates. The Solara Nexus station was a sprawling construct of gleaming silver and blue, designed as a neutral ground for galactic diplomacy. Its vast central chamber could hold representatives from hundreds of species, each with their unique physiology and customs. James, flanked by Chancellor Tyrix and Valrex, stood at the center of the chamber as the summit began. The Syndrex delegation loomed to the right, their golden-scaled leader Carax glowering with barely concealed disdain. Across the room, smaller factions whispered and watched, their motives inscrutable. "Today's purpose is simple," Tyrix announced, "to determine the fate of Aegis Prime, and by extension, the future of galactic stability." Carax sneered. "Stability? You mean Zentharian dominance, propped up by that human abomination?" James sighed, stepping forward. "Let's cut the theatrics, shall we? Aegis Prime isn't Zentharian. It's not Syndrex either. It's a tool, one meant to protect, not destroy. And yet, it has only brought destruction," Carax retorted, his voice sharp. The arguments began in earnest, with representatives debating the armor's significance and who, if anyone, should wield it. James, despite his unease, pushed back with unrelenting logic and occasional flashes of humor that disarmed even the most hardened critics. "You're all scared," James said bluntly, silencing the room. "Scared of what it means for one person, one species, to have this power. But the armor chose me for a reason, and maybe it's time we start figuring out why." The summit dragged on for hours, each faction jockeying for leverage. Some proposed dismantling Aegis Prime, while others demanded it be handed over to a neutral party. James remained steadfast, insisting that the armor wasn't just a weapon, it was a responsibility. By the end of the session, a fragile agreement was reached. Zentharis would retain custody of Aegis Prime, but James would act as a mediator, using the armor only in emergencies. In return, the Syndrex and their allies would cease hostilities, for now. "It's not perfect," Tyrix said as they left the chamber. "Nothing ever is," James replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. The peace lasted less than a week. Barely had the summit's terms been ratified when Syndrex warships appeared on the fringes of Zentharian space, their weapons primed. Carax's duplicity became clear. The summit had been a distraction, buying time for his forces to regroup. "They're launching a full-scale invasion," Valrex reported grimly, the holographic map of Zentharis flashing with warning signals. "We can't hold them off alone," Tyrix said, his voice tight. James, standing at the edge of the council chamber, clenched his fists. The armor pulsed faintly, responding to his growing resolve. "Then we don't fight alone," he said. Drawing on his newfound reputation, James sent a message to the factions who had supported him during the summit. He appealed to their shared interests, reminding them that the Syndrex's ambition threatened everyone, not just Zentharis. Against all odds, several factions responded. A coalition fleet began to assemble, bringing together ships and soldiers from across the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy stood united, not under Zentharian dominance, but under a common cause. "This isn't about me," James told the coalition leaders during a strategy briefing. "It's about us. Aegis Prime may have chosen me, but it's nothing without the people willing to stand and fight." The Syndrex fleet descended on Zentharis like a storm, their ships blotting out the stars. The coalition, though outnumbered, held firm. Battles raged across the planet's surface and in orbit, with every soldier and ship fighting desperately to hold the line. James, clad in Aegis Prime, took to the battlefield once more. The armor glowed with raw power as he faced wave after wave of Syndrex troops. Using its adaptive abilities, he neutralized enemy machines, shielded vulnerable positions, and turned the tide of skirmishes. At the heart of the conflict was Carax, commanding his fleet from an enormous flagship bristling with experimental weapons. James knew that taking down Carax was the only way to end the battle. With the coalition fleet providing cover, James infiltrated the Syndrex flagship. The corridors were a maze of automated defenses and elite soldiers, but Aegis Prime guided him through, neutralizing threats with precision. He found Carax in the command center, flanked by his most loyal guards. The Syndrex leader turned, his golden scales gleaming under the harsh lights. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long, human," Carax growled, drawing a massive energy blade. "Yeah, well, I've been told I'm annoying," James shot back. The duel that followed was a clash of titans. Carax's strength and skill were formidable, but Aegis Prime's adaptability gave James the edge. After a grueling battle, James disarmed Carax and destroyed the flagship's weapons array, forcing the Syndrex fleet into retreat. The battle's end marked a turning point for the galaxy. The Syndrex, humiliated and weakened, retreated to their territories, leaving Zentharis and its allies to rebuild. James, though hailed as a hero, was reluctant to embrace the spotlight. "I'm just a guy who got lucky," he told reporters. But those who had fought alongside him knew better. Aegis Prime's choice had not been luck, it had been necessity. As the galaxy began to heal, James reflected on the journey that had brought him here. In a quiet moment, He spoke to Aegis Prime one last time. "Why me?" he asked. "Because you see beyond yourself," the armor replied. "You unite where others divide. You create where others destroy." James nodded, finally understanding. Aegis Prime had not chosen him for his strength or intellect, but for his humanity, the very thing that made him imperfect. Centuries later, the story of James Carter and Aegis Prime became legend. The armor, now dormant, rested in a place of honor on Zentharis, a reminder of the time when one human changed the course of history. And though the galaxy moved on, one truth endured. Sometimes, the greatest power lies not in perfection, but in the ability to adapt, endure, and inspire.